Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today we're going to be looking at a video essay by Computing Forever called The Word No Preserves Cultures and Nations. I've linked it in the description, and so I don't embed most of his video in mine, I'm hoping you'll be willing to go watch it. I'll briefly summarize the needed context, though. After saying that multiculturalism has failed, he goes on to say that traditional Abrahamic religions value things that make society work, like marriage, families, and associated responsibilities such as raising the children. He then says,
Sadly, the transition from structured religiosity to free-thinking atheistic nations has not been as smooth as it could have been.
Actually, it pretty much has been. This transition cannot go well, because the individual optimization in free-thinking atheism is hedonism, followed by suicide when you can't have fun anymore. There are only so many causes greater than oneself possible in the world, and aside from religion, they tend to work out very badly. In the 18 and 1900s, they tried nationalism to replace religion, but that was a complete disaster. Some suggest replacing the nation with all of humanity, but that's far too amorphous to be inspiring, and also likely includes a lot of people who want to kill you or at least steal your resources. And actually, he goes on to say basically this, but not in so many words.
Secularism and atheism by themselves aren't sufficient to build a society.
He's right, and the real answer is a rational metaphysical grounding in reality, also known as theism, but of course he has a different answer.
It's a form of secular humanism that approaches society from an empirically rational perspective.
There are lots of things I can say about this, but I'll keep it to a few small points. First, the closest that Wikipedia comes to a definition of secular humanism is... Secular humanism posits that human beings are capable of being ethical and moral without religion or a god. By the way, am I the only one who sees the secular humanist logo as two Star Trek communicators that merged? The other point is that empirically means pertaining to, derived from, or testable by observations made using the physical senses or using instruments which extend the senses. If you put these two things together, you get, basically, a non-religious moral or ethical system which is testable by observations made using the physical senses. How could one do this? How could one possibly determine whether any given ethical rule is better or worse by empirical measurements? What good is the temperature of a widow burning, or the kilogram newtons per meter squared of a mugging, going to do you in telling whether these things should be ethical or unethical? And if anyone is going to say that of course you'd measure human happiness, he must first state the SI units for human happiness, and what instrument is capable of objectively measuring happiness in these units. This will have bearing later. After some diagnosis of the ills of the current age, he says,
I believe the single ingredient the West is lacking can be represented in one word, a word we've lost the ability to say for fear of offending or being called racists or bigots. That word is a word that the Christian Church had no trouble telling those who disagreed with it. It's a word that comes from a place of moral conviction, and conviction is something our enemies possess and the left does not. That word is no.
The problem is that the immediate response to no is, why not? An alternate version of that is, but I really want to. I find it interesting that he doesn't address this, because what he's about to say sounds exactly like a parent lecturing a child, so I would have thought he'd be familiar with how that exchange goes.
No, you can't do that here. No, we don't tolerate that kind of behavior in our country. No, our laws are the only laws of the land, and if you don't like them, you can leave. Under no circumstances do we permit you to do that.
I could point out that as a secular humanist, he almost guaranteedly wants a version of morality, popular at the moment but very different from the prevailing morality 5 generations ago, and fought for almost exclusively by asking, why not? And not taking a mere, no, we don't do that, for an answer. But I'm not going to. The real problem with this is symbolized by the fact that at no point does he ever mention there being any justification for any of these values or ethics. The reason the Christian Church had no trouble telling anyone no is precisely because it wasn't their own message. It's the same reason why physicists have no trouble telling anyone that they can't go faster than the speed of light. It's not their idea, they're just the messenger. By contrast, the empirical secular humanism being proposed is nothing but the idea of the countries who would be saying no. Since you can't objectively measure happiness, nor for that matter ethically conduct controlled experiments for most ethics. Okay, two groups. Child molestation is legal in this group, illegal in that group. And before you yell at me about this, if you're not going to test your ethics, you have absolutely no business calling it empirical or scientific. If your scientific ethics depends on what everyone knows to be true without testing, what you mean by scientific is what I and my friends think. Science without repeatable experiments is just making stuff up and demanding that everyone believes you. Which brings us right back to the problem at hand. If you just pick some stuff as your values, then enforce it without debate, this is an exercise of pure will. And here's where we come to the really big problem. In the real world, as opposed to whatever world secular humanist manifestos tend to be written for, you can't get a large number of people to move and think as one, as if they were the cells in a large organism with but a single mind. This is even more the case when no one is operating on the same theory of the universe that has clear moral implications, and instead everyone's just following their own whims or instincts or whatever you want to call it. Just to make it concrete, the left-wing multiculturalists are in the same country as you. Do you plan to get them to enforce your preferred values rather than theirs? By asking nicely? So when the hoped-for unity of purpose inevitably doesn't happen, there are only two possible next steps. The first is to throw your hands up and get used to anarchy, after which a strong group will invade and take over because disorganized individuals can do little to resist on their own. The second is to give power to a strong man who will dominate the chaos before any outside groups get a chance to invade. Basically, a dictator is the only way you're going to get the national strength of will to enforce cultural norms by pure will. Now, to be crystal clear, I am not saying that Computing Forever wants a dictator. He sounds like a reasonable person, and reasonable people aren't crazy like that. The problem is that he's accidentally asking for one. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.